Welcome to The Atypical View. I'm your host, Lauren Florio, a licensed marriage and family therapist specializing in autism, ADHD, and broader neurodiversity. As a fellow neurodivergent mind, I'm here to help us learn and spread awareness on all things mental health, as well as help us unlearn harmful stereotypes by providing psychoeducation rooted in research and lived experience rooted in my atypical view. The Atypical View is obviously this podcast, but it's also my private practice where I provide therapy to clients here in California with me and provide neurodiverse coaching to others worldwide. So, without further ado, let's jump into the Atypical View. Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about autistic meltdowns. We're also going to be better understanding the difference between a meltdown and an emotional outburst or a temper tantrum. In childhood, temper tantrums are often misunderstood in undiagnosed autistic kids, and they're labeled as just having too many tantrums, when the reality is this is actually a nervous system response due to overwhelm and a lot of other things rather than an intentional behavior. So for the parents out there, we will help you better understand the difference between if your child is having a tantrum or a meltdown. And for the adults out there who don't have kids, we're going to help you better understand how meltdowns might show up in autistic adults, especially late diagnosed, high masking adults. Let's jump into our first segment today. Let's start off by explaining what a tantrum is. Tantrums are goal-driven behavior. So children, especially toddlers, don't actually have the capacity to manipulate in the way that we understand it, but kids do learn how to get their needs met. So a temper tantrum is typically driven by a child's desire for something. They either want attention or an item. A temper tantrum is technically a learned behavior, and once the child gets what they're seeking, the behavior stops, so the tantrum stops. While a meltdown is a nervous system overload. It's not just frustration. The body enters a state of a trauma response, like fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And in autistic individuals, because of the sensory overload and emotional reactivity that they deal with, there is a much greater challenge in regulation. Keeping their nervous system calm is much harder. This is not a matter of poor discipline or immaturity. You want to discipline a tantrum, but you don't want to discipline a meltdown, if that makes sense. So some tantrum examples might be dad leaves for work, mom leaves for work, and so that kid wants the parent. So they scream, they cry, they kick. In most cases, parent doesn't come back in the door, so eventually they do have to self-soothe and move on or get distracted and move on. Another example would be not getting dessert before dinner. So maybe the kid wants a lollipop and they see a lollipop and they start screaming and crying and kicking. That might be a tantrum. Same thing in a grocery store. You go down and you see the cool Pop-Tarts and your kid's like, I want it. Or they see the teddy bear and they're like, I want it. And so they're really upset. The thing is, with all of these examples, if mom and dad walked back in the door, if the child got the lollipop, if the child got the Pop-Tarts or the teddy bear, the tantrum would end. They would get more regulated again. They would be happy. It might take a second to go from crying to not crying, but they're no longer in distress. With a meltdown, there is not any one thing that you can provide your child or yourself as an adult or your loved one who is an adult that will make the meltdown stop. At this point, it is only regulation based. Maybe the straw that broke the camel's back was that they couldn't have the cookie before dinner, the lollipop before dinner. But if it's a meltdown, giving them the lollipop or the cookie is not actually going to solve the problem. If you're trying to identify, is this a behavior that is nervous system related or tantrum related? We don't really want to encourage it by giving the kid what they want, but this can be a good way to solve that problem, especially if we go back into the past. When we've given in, has anything changed? In a lot of cases, it's a no. And that being said, autistic kids can still have tantrums. So it's not that we don't want to just give our autistic child everything that they ask for. They can still have tantrums and they still need to be disciplined in the same way that another child needs to be disciplined. We can't give our kids everything, unfortunately. But, that's parenting advice more than anything, so to each their own. Some key differences to look for. Are these tantrums happening because the individual wants something specific? When it's happening, is the individual checking for reactions from others, right? Is it kind of like a crocodile tear situation where they really want you to see how upset that they are? If you have to turn for a second and talk to your partner or a different sibling, does the behavior decrease a bit, right? If attention's not on them, does the behavior go down? And again, does the behavior end when the person gets what they want? These are all good indicators that this is a tantrum. Now, some things to spot to identify a meltdown is, do we see sensory overwhelm? So from a sensory perspective, are they pulling at their clothes? Are they trying to get their clothes off? Are they putting their head down under a pillow to get away from the dark? Are they scratching at themselves, their eyes, their face? Sometimes smells and stuff can get so overwhelming that it almost makes your face itch. Sometimes touch can feel painful, even just from your clothes. So those are some things to check for. An emotional overload, again, is that if you turn and look away, they're not stopping. They can't regulate. This is not a choice by any means. This behavior would not change based off of reward or consequences. We can't use behavioral techniques to improve this or worsen it. This is a nervous system issue. This is not a behavioral issue. And finally, a good thing to check for is after the fact, after they become more regulated, the perceived meltdown ends. Do we see this individual so exhausted? Do we see them withdrawn? After a meltdown, it is extremely common to have a shutdown or shutdown-like symptoms. And a shutdown is very internal and withdrawn, whereas a meltdown is very external. It looks very similar to a tantrum. But if they get very withdrawn and internal, maybe they need more sleep, maybe they can't really talk as well or communicate as well, those are all signs that this might have been a meltdown. Also, if supporting sensory aspects like them being in the dark or turning down the volume of the TV or music or having a comfort item or having things that are agitating them like a scratchy sweater are removed, we might see an improvement on the meltdown side of things too. Obviously, autistic individuals tend to have increased sensory sensitivity, and that input can exceed what the nervous system can handle and trigger this protective response that we see as a meltdown. So let's talk about identifying meltdowns in high masking autistic adults. Meltdowns are not age specific. I want to be very clear. And there's also this idea that meltdowns are preventable. Like we can prevent them all of the time. We're just not parenting well enough. We're not taking care of ourselves well enough. That's not true. There is so much that is unpredictable about the autistic experience and just so much that we don't know that even as someone who, this is my career, I eat, breathe, live autism. I am autistic. I still have meltdowns. I cannot always prevent meltdowns for myself, despite knowing what my sensory issues are, despite knowing what my triggers are. I do still have meltdowns. There are unpreventable things that we cannot control. So do not be down on yourself as a parent of an autistic child who's having meltdowns or as an individual who's trying to manage your meltdowns. Don't be down on yourself for having them. You don't need to punish yourself more because your nervous system is overwhelmed. It happens. You're going to be okay. And you're probably going to have a meltdown again, and you're going to get past it. We can reduce meltdowns. We can prevent some when we see the warning signs, but we can't erase them altogether. Let's move into identifying meltdowns, especially in high masking adults. If you're not diagnosed and you want to better understand if these emotional outbursts you're having might be meltdowns, this is a good place to start. For the warning signs, at least, of the meltdown, these might even be applied to others who are non-high masking as well. And as a caregiver, you might be able to keep an eye out, whether it's a child or an adult that you're looking at, to see if you notice these things coming up for them too. But I'm going to talk about it through the perspective of self. So in yourself, you may notice a stronger sensory aversion, that increased awareness of your sensory experience. All of a sudden, you're just like feeling your hair on your face. You're feeling your clothes on your body more. You're itchier. You're noticing all of the smells that you walk by a little bit more. Things are just starting to bother you in a way that they normally might fall into the background just a little bit more, right? We still notice our sensory experiences more than the neurotypical person, but for you, you may be noticing these sensory issues more than what is normal for you. Another thing to keep an eye out is for things like increased nervousness, anxiety, agitation, irritability. This might show up physically as increased stimming, fidgeting, pacing around the house. Any kind of like repetitive motor behavior is how we expel some of this energy. Sometimes we stim intentionally to help ourselves regulate, but if we're doing it unintentionally and it's harder to, not that we want to control it, but it might feel harder to control than normal, we're noticing it more. That's a good sign that something, our nervous system is getting pushed out of our window of tolerance. We can't handle where our dysregulation is at. Another thing that can happen, and I did say that the signs of verbal shutdowns, reduced communication, kind of difficulty communication, this does happen afterwards. So we do see frequently after a meltdown. It's just so depleting that we get pushed into a shutdown, but these can happen beforehand too. And so you might notice within yourself, you're not communicating your best. Maybe you see some brain fog. Maybe you're in a true shutdown. Maybe you're in a true like verbal shutdown, but maybe you're just struggling to conversate. You're more socially withdrawn and just in general struggling to communicate how you feel. And then we'll take some of these things and we'll present them into what a high masking meltdown could look like. And I want to note that this presentation is why many high-masking autistic adults are misdiagnosed with depression rather than autism. So I recognize that some of these symptoms do just look like a depressive episode. So having these symptoms do not mean that you're having a meltdown necessarily. What we might see are like episodes of being very closed off in public, that shut down, reduced communication, pulling away publicly, while as soon as we get like home, and we're in a private space, very high emotional distress. We might see is eloping, which is essentially like running away when we're not supposed to from a space. We could see hiding. Maybe you lock yourself in your room. Maybe you lock yourself in a room or a bathroom if you're in public, just to sort of be away from people. A different type, which is less internal, like the withdrawal, and more external, is that physical aggression. So if we're noticing that agitation, irritability, or pacing a little bit more, this could show that we're moving towards a verbal lash out or even physical aggression towards other or ourselves. I want to be very clear. These are not excuses, but these are just this is just the reality of what can happen, but it's not an excuse for this behavior. Mental health provides an explanation for what is going on. It does not provide an excuse for poor behavior. So the last piece to look at is, again, this is a little bit more in that internal expression, but like the dissociation. So we're disconnecting in that autopilot space. Maybe we're feeling a lot of hopelessness. Maybe we're getting really tearful. These very like depression-like symptoms tend to sort of pop up because we're not managing this nervous system regulation well, and it's taking its toll. And I do think that in a lot of cases, there is a good argument that things like anxiety and depression are secondary diagnoses or even better symptoms of a primary diagnosis that's being untreated. And I really feel like that is what's happening in this. So we're going to move into how to support regulation in mid-meltdown, and this is from the perspective of a loved one. These are things that we can do as an outside person for a loved one with autism when we are watching them have a meltdown. I'm going to use this part to transition into the atypical view part of today's episode because I think that while a lot of this is evidence-based and some of this is anecdotal, and so I do want to be able to express what I have found to be very supportive in my body and also what I've heard from other autistic individuals sharing what's good for them. Take this with a grain of salt because each autistic individual is going to be different and might want different things. This is the second part of today's episode. This is the Atypical View. This is typically where I go in and share my view on the topic for the day. I'm going to use this time to go over some do's and don'ts that I have found over the years to be supportive for me and things that I've had reinforced by other people as well. So I want to preface by saying when someone is in a meltdown, logic and reasoning are out of reach for them. We have to focus on helping calm the body first, and that means supporting that nervous system. We're not going to talk someone out of a meltdown. So I'm going to start with some do's. For me, reducing sensory input is incredibly important. That might mean for myself, putting myself in a dark room, turning off the TV, music. I don't have scent plugs in, but maybe removing scent plugs, taking a candle out of the room, removing any sensory triggers. For showing up for a loved one, we might do this for them. We might go turn down the lights, turn off the TV. We might even help support them to get into a more comfortable position. Depending on the relationship we have with that person, we might help support them getting into more comfortable clothes or out of their clothes. I will rip off all of my clothes in a meltdown. And so it is much better to have someone help me facilitate that. What I will add in the don'ts, which is a little bit of a contradictory here, is during this heightened state, touch is painful. Give space and don't touch. If you see someone pulling at their clothes, this is where we might offer, and we want to do our best to not physically touch the person. So if we can grab the clothes without touching that person's skin, that's going to be a lot more comfortable. Obviously, it's going to be unavoidable in some moments, but again, depending on our relationship, and we can attempt to support. If you start to remove clothing and they yank back from you, do not continue to try. Take a step back. If you see them struggling and you offer the hand and then they lean into your help, awesome. That's great. But listen to their body cues because they might not be able to communicate in that moment. A do that I think is really helpful here is do offer co-regulation. So stay close by, stay calm, offer a calm voice when you do talk to them. Speak really slowly, and breathe in between. Breathe slowly and almost intentionally so that they can hear it. This will help them regulate as well. You might want to offer silence if you can't maintain that calm voice, but being able to be regulated will help regulate that person. The don't in this area is don't panic alongside of them. Don't start freaking out. You need to be able to manage your own feelings to make space for theirs. If not, you are not the right person to support them in that moment. And I understand in some cases, if you're the parent and your child is very likely to hurt themselves or harm themselves, I get it. You're going to have to step in, but this is really important for you to start practicing your own nervous system regulation techniques, so that when the time comes, you're more prepared to handle your emotions and feelings. The next do is bring them comfort items. So if you can safely leave the room, grab their water bottle, grab their favorite blanket or a soft blanket, grab a fidget toy or a stim toy, and just place them within reach of the person. You might say, I have your water right here if you want it. I have your blanket right here if you want it. What we don't want to do is moving into the don'ts is don't ask questions. Don't say, do you want me to go get your water? Do you want me to grab your blanket? Should I go grab your fidget toy? Don't ask questions. They do not have the brain capacity to answer questions most likely. And what little capacity they have shouldn't be spent on answering questions when we can just provide comfort items. If there's a part of you that's like, I think that they might need a tissue, I see that they're crying, just go grab the tissue. If they don't use it, they don't use it. If there's something that you think could help and you can go and get it in a safe way, then absolutely do that. Don't force it on them, but place it nearby and maybe verbally let them know. I want to recognize that these are things that have helped me. These have helped me move through meltdowns and regulate my body again. Sometimes it is just comforting to know that someone is with you when you are in such immense pain and overwhelm. To not be alone in that moment can be very powerful, and it's also incredibly vulnerable. It is incredibly vulnerable to have a meltdown in front of somebody else. I still struggle with the vulnerability in that moment. And I know that there are people who post these things of their own volition online to spread awareness, and I think that's fantastic, but that is a big ask. And so I will also add, do not record your child having a meltdown. Your child deserves privacy in this moment, and posting that online when they are not in a position to consent to that is not spreading awareness. It is just harming your child. I know that that sounds harsh and maybe it's controversial, but that is such a private moment. Don't betray your child's trust in you by sharing that when they can't consent to what they're doing. Now, again, there are lots of autistic individuals who do willingly share these things for education and for spreading awareness. And that autonomous choice is great, awesome, 10 out of 10. You do you, babe. But the key difference in this that I want to come back to is autonomy and is choice. I am someone who had meltdowns and have had meltdowns my whole life and was treated as if I was having tantrums. It was always seen as a behavioral problem and never that I was needing support and that I was severely dysregulated or sensory overwhelmed or whatever it was. I show up for my younger self today by trying to create a better sensory environment, for trying to accommodate myself when I am too overwhelmed, by saying no to things, by having better boundaries and accommodations for myself. And honestly, you deserve that too. So this is a good moment to transition into our final segment for today's episode. This is our call to action segment. And so I know I already gave a call to action to not record your child mid-meltdown if they can't consent to it. I stand by that. But besides that, I do just want to acknowledge that by being able to recognize the difference between a meltdown and a tantrum, it really can transform this chronic misunderstanding for so many undiagnosed and diagnosed autistic individuals, to really being able to apply empathy to their situation and being able to show up and meet their needs and teach them how to meet their own needs moving forward. When we can meet dysregulation with compassion rather than trying to control the behavior, control the action, we can really create space for healing and authenticity and connection. So from a therapy and neurodiverse perspective, if you're struggling with meltdowns, there is support for you. I would really encourage you to work with a mental health professional on this. And that's part of my role, is to help individuals and families learn personal regulation strategies and honor each person's unique sensory profile and unique neurotype to really learn how to accommodate themselves and show up for themselves. Seek out support if you need it. But if the one thing you can do for yourself is to accommodate one sensory need of yours, maybe it's throwing out the scent plugs. For me, it was getting rid of my turtlenecks. I needed to stop lying to myself that I could tolerate turtlenecks. I hated them, and my life is so much better now that I do not have a sea full of turtlenecks in my closet. I used to like how they looked on me, so I had a lot, and I hate how they feel. I feel like I'm being choked. Tune into your body and notice if there's one thing you can change from your sensory experience this week, whether it's changing out a piece of clothing, maybe it's getting rid of using wool fabric in your closet, or maybe it's stop trying to force yourself to eat a food that has a bad texture that you just continue to try to choke down because you've decided it's healthy, and try to pivot to something else that you can tolerate better. There's so many different things that we can do to accommodate ourselves that aren't these huge commitments. Sometimes it really is just going, you know what, I don't need to do this to myself anymore. I don't need to do this to myself anymore. See if there is one thing that you can introduce that will ease your mental load. And I would really encourage you to practice nervous system regulation. We did talk about that in an episode or two ago. So if you need some support on how to keep your nervous system more regulated, I would definitely go and check that out. That episode is on dissociation and nervous system regulation. And it gives some good sort of general tips and tricks on how to keep yourself regulated. So that is my call to you today. Honor yourself, accommodate yourself, throw out the turtlenecks. That's it for today. Just remember, meltdowns are not something to feel shame about, and you deserve to accommodate yourself and live a life that is less distressing. Take care of yourself. Thanks for spending this time with me today. If this episode resonated with you, feel free to share it, subscribe, leave a comment or a review, or send it to someone who might benefit from the psychoeducation, or just need a little reminder that they are not alone. If you are interested in my coaching or therapy services, you can reach out to me directly and connect with me at theatypicalview.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and I hope we can stay connected.